When my close friend's little girl, Lily, turned 7, I would sometimes watch her whenever they needed. They lived in a nice house in Oregon, surrounded by woods and hills with the closest neighbors a couple of miles away. I always liked the peace and quiet out there. One time my friend asked if I could take care of Lily for 2 days while she went on a business trip. I agreed, and a few weeks later I drove over to their place. We chatted for a while, had lunch, and then she finished packing before heading to the airport. I spent the afternoon with Lily listening to her talk about school, and her friends. Later we went out to grab some food and dessert. By the time we got back, it was around 8. We decided to watch a movie before bed. I was sitting on the couch scrolling through movie options when Lily suddenly asked, "Who's that?" She was pointing at the front door. Just then we both heard knocking. Considering how far out this house was, I never expected anyone to show up. Nervously, I walked over and cracked the door open. A tall man stood on the porch. He looked a little surprised when I opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked. He leaned slightly to the side, peeking in through the gap, and said, "Sorry, just checking if someone was home." Then he turned and walked away. It was strange, creepy even. I shut the door, locked it, and then went to secure the back door too. Lily asked who it was, and I told her it was just a neighbor. Then we settled back on the couch and started the movie. The film ended later than I expected. Afterward, I told Lily it was bedtime and followed her upstairs as she got ready. Once she was tucked in, I went back down to the couch. It was after 10, and since I wasn't tired yet, I put on some TV to unwind. After a while, I began hearing crunching noises outside. I muted the TV and listened carefully as the sound was coming from the back of the house. I turned on the porch light and looked around, but the yard was empty, just trees beyond the porch. I stayed there for a few minutes before going back to the couch, telling myself I was just on edge being out in the middle of the woods at night. During the day, I loved how quiet it was, but at night the isolation felt unsettling. I turned the volume back up, stretched out on the couch, and ended up falling asleep. A couple of hours later, I woke up and realized the TV was still on. I shut it off and sat up, rubbing my eyes. That uneasy feeling crept in again as I noticed how completely silent the house was. Then I heard the crunching again. This time it was unmistakably footsteps. They came from the right side of the house, just outside the room I was in. A few seconds later, the sound stopped as if someone was standing right by the window. My chest tightened. I walked over slowly and pulled the curtain aside, but no one was there. Nothing at all. Trying to calm myself, I got a glass of water and went upstairs to bed. The next morning, I made breakfast for Lily, and we talked about what we might do that day. Out of nowhere, she asked why I had been walking around outside the night before. I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. She told me she had heard someone circling the house for nearly an hour after she went to bed. Chills went through me. I told her to stay put while I checked around outside. I grabbed a kitchen knife just in case and walked out the front door. It was hard to tell if anything was from the night before, but I noticed scratches on the walls near some of the windows and doors. The yard was mostly thick grass, so I couldn't see footprints. As I came back around the front, I spotted the same man from yesterday walking down the road in front of the house he was just passing by. But considering how far away this place was, he had to have walked miles to be there. I went back inside and told Lily we were going to the mall for the day. I didn't want to stay in that house any longer than necessary. We spent most of the day out and didn't return until about 6, soon after my friend called to check in. I mentioned the man describing what he looked like. She said she remembered him. Apparently, he had shown up at her door a few weeks earlier, asking if he could stay the night. She, of course, had turned him away. We agreed that if anything else happened, I'd call the police right away. As it got dark, I double-checked all the doors to make sure they were locked, around 9. Lily and I were playing a board game when we both heard a faint tapping outside the window. I stood up and tried to stay calm for Lily, but then came a loud scratching against the wall right next to the window. I grabbed her, rushed to the garage, and we jumped into the car. I backed out fast, making sure the garage door shut behind us. As we drove off, Lily said she saw someone darting into the trees behind the house. I pulled into a hotel parking lot and called the police, then called my friend. Within 10 minutes, 2 officers met us at the hotel. They told us that more officers were already at the house checking around. I explained everything and gave them the man's description. We ended up staying in a hotel room that night. The next morning, my friend called to say her flight had just landed and she'd be back within the hour. We waited in the driveway for her return and then all went into the house together. I stayed for a few hours to talk everything over, then finally headed home. It was easily one of the most frightening experiences I've ever had. The man was eventually caught a month later after being reported by several people for trying to break into their homes. What unsettles me the most is that when he did manage to break into one house, he didn't take anything, he just looked around and left. To this day, I still wonder what he really wanted the night he tried to get into the house. When I was 13, my mom would hire someone to watch me once a week. Since she worked late every Saturday night, I always felt like I was too old for a babysitter, and I hated having someone around just to keep an eye on me. Most of the time, the person she asked was a 20-year-old guy named Aaron, the son of one of her coworkers. Aaron made me uncomfortable. He was quiet, awkward, and overall strange around me. He barely said a word, but whenever my mom was present, he'd suddenly act polite and chatty. I mentioned this to her more than once, but she always brushed it off, saying I was just trying to avoid having someone there so I could be alone. That Saturday evening started off the same as usual. Aaron showed up a little later than expected, like he often did. My mom talked with him briefly before heading out the door for work. I sat down on the couch and turned on my game console to play for a while, knowing I had about 4 or 5 hours to kill before bed at 10 o'clock. Aaron usually kept to himself in the kitchen or upstairs, and that night was no different at first. After a few minutes, I noticed him speaking to someone in a very low voice. The kitchen was just behind the living room where I was sitting, but I couldn't make out the words no matter how hard I tried to listen. After a few minutes, the conversation stopped and he walked into the living room. He stood next to the couch holding his phone and told me almost casually that someone was going to stop by for just a minute and that I shouldn't worry about it. I didn't know what else to say, so I just nodded. It felt strange, definitely not something a babysitter should be doing, but I also knew I couldn't do anything to change it. The next 20 minutes were uncomfortable. Aaron sat beside me in the living room, not on his phone, not talking, just sitting there glancing around. Usually he kept his distance, so this was very out of character, but since the living room was right by the front door, it seemed like he was waiting. Soon a car pulled into the driveway and a man knocked on the door. Aaron quickly stood up, paused for a moment, then told me he'd be right back. He opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind him. Curious, I peeked through a small gap in the blinds. Outside, I could see their shadows moving around in the driveway. It looked like the man handed Aaron a large bag before getting into his car and driving away. Moments later, I heard the lid of the outdoor trash can slam shut. Then Aaron came back inside. I asked him what that was about. He said it was just his friend dropping off his wallet that he had left behind the night before. His explanation didn't add up, especially considering the big bag I saw him carrying, but I didn't push him. I just said okay and went back to my game. Things got even stranger as the evening went on over. The next hour, I heard Aaron make several phone calls from the kitchen. At one point, he moved to the upstairs loft, raising his voice. During the conversation, I still couldn't make out what was being said. After maybe the 5th or 6th call, the same car from earlier pulled up in the driveway again. This time, Aaron rushed outside without a word through the window. I could see their gestures and movements. It was obvious they were arguing. After a short time, Aaron left and came back holding the same bag from before. He handed it to the man who tossed it in his back seat and sped off. Aaron came back inside looking upset and went straight to the kitchen. He stayed there until about 10 o'clock when he finally told me to get ready for bed. I went upstairs, brushed my teeth, and laid down. While he remained downstairs normally, he would stay until midnight when my mom returned. But just a few minutes later, I heard the front door open and close. I waited 10 minutes, then quietly went downstairs to check. He was gone, and so was his car. I stayed awake in bed until my mom got home and told her everything. This time she actually believed me, since leaving before she returned was unusual and unprofessional. The next day she tried calling Aaron, but he didn't answer. Eventually she contacted his mom, who claimed Aaron had come home sick that night. Both of us knew that didn't make sense. He could have just called if he wasn't feeling well. It's been nearly 10 years since then, but I still think about that night. I wonder what was in the bag, why he left so suddenly, and what he and that man had been arguing about. I used to babysit during my college years as a way to earn extra cash without committing to a strict work schedule. Most of the time I watched over a couple's 4-year-old son whenever they had evening work functions. He was a sweet, quiet kid, which honestly made things easy for me. He usually just sat with his toys or watched cartoons and seemed to enjoy my company. The house was a comfortable suburban home, the kind that always felt safe and warm. This was my 6th time looking after him, so the routine was familiar. I got to their house just before his parents headed out. They told me they'd be home around 11 p.m. and reminded me to have him in bed by 9. The first part of the night went smoothly. We watched some TV together, and I heated up a small frozen pizza for him. After eating, he went to the bathroom and disappeared for a few minutes. When he came back, he asked me about some noises he thought he heard coming from the basement. At first, I was confused, but when I muted the TV, I caught 2 faint shuffling sounds drifting up from below. They weren't loud, but were definitely noticeable in the quiet house. The boy looked nervous, so I gave him a reassuring smile and told him not to worry. I figured it was probably just some critter, maybe a raccoon that had gotten inside. I told him to stay on the couch while I went to check it out. By the time I opened the basement door, the noises had stopped. I'd never actually been down there before, but I flicked on the stair light and walked down carefully, each step groaning under my weight. Another light at the bottom lit up the space, which was bigger than I expected. It was a large concrete room filled with storage boxes, old furniture, and holiday decorations. I peeked around a few piles but didn't find anything, so I went back upstairs. The boy was waiting for me on the couch. I told him everything was fine and gave him a hug to reassure him. He seemed to forget about it, and I didn't think much more about it myself. Later, when it was almost 9, I got him ready for bed. After tucking him in and saying goodnight, I went back downstairs. I spent the next half hour or so just scrolling through my phone on the couch when I heard it again. The shuffling. But this time it was louder, more distinct. It wasn't the sound of a small animal. It was heavier. I froze, listening hard. Then I heard the boy's bedroom door open upstairs and he called out for me. I told him to stay put and not come down. My chest was tight as I crept toward the basement door, phone in hand ready to call 911. I opened the door just a crack and reached for the light switch, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound was right near the bottom of the stairs now. When the light flicked on, what I saw made me slam the door shut instantly. I ran upstairs, grabbed the boy, and bolted straight outside into the cold night air. We stood across the street and I called 911, my voice shaking. I also phoned his parents, telling them what was happening and to come back immediately. When the police showed up, I explained everything. What I saw when the light came on was a man gaunt and half-dressed, crouched at the bottom of the stairs, rummaging through one of the boxes. He had looked up at the sudden light, his eyes wide and feral like a cornered animal. The officers searched the house carefully. They found signs that someone had been living down there, trash hidden inside boxes, and evidence of makeshift sleeping areas. But the man himself was gone. He must have slipped out through a small basement window when he heard me on the phone. The parents arrived soon after, thanking me for getting their son out safely. They spent time talking with the police while I waited outside until things wrapped up. Eventually, I was allowed to go home. For the next couple of weeks, I was jumpy and paranoid, double-checking locks. I stayed in contact with the family for updates, but the intruder was never caught. After that, I stopped babysitting altogether. The part that still unsettles me most is knowing he slipped away that night and could be hiding in someone else's basement right now without them even realizing it. It's the thought of that hidden presence that I can't forget.